Welcome back to another episode of My BrainWise Coach. I am Bastian.
And I'm Phil Dixon.
And we're so excited that you have joined us for another episode where we talk about things happening in neuroscience. We go through different topics that help us understand how to use neuroscience and some psychology and a bit of behavioral science to decode and live better lives. So today we're going to be talking about an actually proprietary model to Phil Dixon. We've talked about it a few times, Phil, over the last season and a half, which is hard to believe. We're already at 1.5 seasons almost, but we referenced it as the PTP, the personal threat profile, or we're going to talk about it today as the 5P model, which I think we've said that before. But it's essentially, and I won't go into all the details, I'll let Phil do it, but we're going to go through it today to share with you, and we're going to talk specifically, why is this important and how might you use it in your life today to help you understand what might be going on, as well as give you an option, if it's of interest to you in the future, to reach out to us to actually go through the PTP and the full assessment. And I do want to just, before we dive all the way in, Phil, make 2 comments. 1, maybe 3 actually. If you're interested in more detail of what we're talking about, I would highly encourage you to purchase Phil's book, Understand Your Brain for a Change. It can be purchased on Amazon, and a lot of the detail of what's going to be talked about today, and probably even more so in terms of the individual facets, can be found in that book. So highly encourage you to do that. That's number 1. Number 2, if you're enjoying our show and you're enjoying going along this journey with us, please give us a 5-star rating in Spotify, Apple, wherever you get your podcasts. Share it with friends and family, like us, follow us on YouTube and social media platforms, comment, engage with us, because the more you do that, the more people that can find us and also go along this journey of understanding our brains and being able to live better lives by doing so. And the final note is I want to just give a shout out to my cousin by virtue of marriage, Stacy. She listens to our podcast, Phil, is a faithful listener, so thank you very much. And she made a recommendation last week that we put some visuals on screen to help provide some additional dynamicism, I think is the word I'm trying to say. I don't know exactly how to say it, but regardless, to give some additional context and provide some more engagement throughout the journey. So we're going to give it a try today. So thank you, Stacy, for that piece of advice. And without further ado, go ahead, Phil.
Thank you, Stacy.
Yeah, I think it was a great advice. She did say we should bring my little dog, Timmy, up also and have him do a cameo. But unfortunately, I think he would cause quite the ruckus if a car drove by. So we're going to pause on that for now. But that's all right. But without further ado, Phil, let's dive into the conversation today. I think it's a great model. We've used it in many ways. And one of the things I think we should do is we're talking about each of the different pieces is you've done it now with, I don't know exactly how many, but I know there's around 500 plus people that have gone through this particular assessment. Maybe share a little bit of context on how understanding this part has helped them and share some anecdotal stories if they come to you, because that might be interesting for our BrainWise friends to hear firsthand accounts of it.
So happy to. But the bottom line is, one of the things I've found is that the more people understand their brain, it just helps in every way. It's every facet, every dimension of your life, it seems to help. And one of the things that we have is that our brain has a conscious part to it and a non-conscious part. The non-conscious part tends to do a lot more of the driving. And one of the things that might, for our BrainWise listeners right now, some of their non-conscious is probably paying attention to what's behind me. And so I'm going to introduce my new friend over here, developed by a guy called Fowler. And he introduced a concept in, I think, the late 1800s, early 1900s, that you could tell someone's brain by the bumps on their head. Mm-hmm. And so it was called phrenology. And he made a fortune of it and traveling around the world teaching people about how the brain works by the bumps on the head. It turned out to be completely fallacious. It was just not accurate at all. But he got into the history of neuroscience. I was given this as a gift by a colleague of mine. So maybe we should have a competition. What do we want to call this guy?
I love it.
And just on the other side is actually a replication of a human brain. And so we'll be using that as part of our visuals. And the picture behind me is a sort of a representation. It's a fanciful representation of a journey into wherever we might be going. So that's what's going on behind. And I say that to emphasize the fact that we've got a conscious brain, which is listening to the words we say, but we've got a non-conscious brain, which is actually processing all this other stuff going on. So
I don't have a new brain friend, which I'm excited for us to name your brain friend back there, Phil. Both of them, actually. But I do, my husband did buy me a new plant that's over here to the right of me, and its name is Zebra. Well, hopefully it stays alive because the last one we had did not quite make it. It died, unfortunately. And just a shout out to my sister, Marissa. She did that painting that's on the wall behind me as a replica of another that I liked. So she did that work.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah.
That's really good. Anyway, so moving into the 5P model, there's lots of ways of talking about the brain. There's the sort of qualitative, philosophical, that type of thing. And you can get into an endless debate about what that's all about. And so what I've found is that if we want to understand the brain, then let's go into it in a more sort of scientific basis, a neuroscience basis. And we can start understanding what's the structure of the brain, what each structure does, and how this all came about. I started to, about 10 years ago, started to look at what causes us to get triggered from a stress point of view. And I identified 47 different facets. And then I took them all and labeled them in some way or form. And that came 5 big, dimensions, whatever you want to call them, buckets of information. And that's what we're going to be talking about today. So it's based on the structure of the brain, the neuroscience knowledge that we know about, and a way of putting it into a model so that we can remember and use it on a day-to-day basis to go, oh, I know this, how this is impacting me. So that's the basis of it. So let's talk a little bit about the brain itself. And I'm going to quickly run through what we said back in, I think it was like July of this last year. We call it the 1 to 5 model of the 5P. One is the brain has one purpose, which is your survival. Mm-hmm. It operates in 2 modes. We just talked about that, a conscious mode and a non-conscious mode. It has 3 layers to it, and we're going to come back to that in a moment. There's 4 processes that happen, which is cue recognition, a thought process, a feeling process, and then a reaction, self-control, or whatever it might be. And then there's 5 dynamics to the brain, and we're going to be talking about those 5 dynamics. Those were the ones about we're driven by stress, we're driven by irrationality, and all those type of things. And what we're going to dig into today is 2 and 3. What's going on at a non-conscious level and the 3 layers. So let's actually go on to the next image, and that is what we call the hardware of the brain. If you think of the brain as we've all had computers now. You've got some hardware, you've got an operating system, and then you've got applications. All right. So we're going to be talking about the hardware and the operating system. And everybody's own activities are the applications themselves. Mm-hmm. So from the hardware point of view, the brain has essentially 3 layers. The bottom layer, which is the oldest layer we have in the brain, is called the reptilian brain. And its focus is on basically your survival, keeping you out of trouble. And it's threatened by physical changes. It's wanting personal protection, and it's rewarded by us feeling safe, feeling warm, feeling comfortable, and all those type of things. That's the bottom layer, if you like. Then around that is what we call the limbic system, and that is where emotions are processed. There's a little thing in the middle of the limbic system called the amygdala. There's actually 2, one on either side, and its focus is on social interaction and feeling safe, but from a social point of view. And it's threatened by things like rejection or insults, all those type of things. The old saying, sticks and stones can hurt my bones, but no words will never hurt me. That's actually not true. Words can hurt you just as much. And the difference between a physical pain and a social pain is that physical pain goes away. Social pain will stay with you. And so that's the limbic system in a nutshell. You'll often hear the limbic system and the reptilian brain as a whole called the emotional brain. And so that's, if you hear that phrase, that's what that's about. Then wrapping around all of that is what's called the neocortex. It just literally means, actually, I think it translates as the new bark. Bark as in a tree, so that's what it was thought of. That's more around conscious thinking and can we understand the context of the world that's around us.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the way that part of it contributes to our survival in looking at how we predict and understand what's going on around us. So the three big layers.
And isn't there on the front, Phil, of the neocortex, that's where the PFC is, the prefrontal cortex?
It's the prefrontal cortex, and it's a specialized part of the cortex, which is specifically around what we generically call the executive functions brain. And that's things like administrative aspects, it's things like planning, risk assessment, self-control, empathy with others. And there's a whole list of those. We call them in general, as I said, the executive functions, very specific part of the brain. The brain in general, if like you and I are sitting here right now, we're not exercising particularly much. The brain is occupying about 20% of our energy.
Wow.
Although it's probably only 2% of our body weight, it's 20% of our energy consumption. So it's in some ways, it's an energy hog. And so it's taking up much more of its energy than we would expect. The prefrontal cortex that you referenced just now takes up a disproportionate amount of energy of the brain. Again, it's a fraction of the brain's size, but it occupies, again, about 20% of the brain's energy. Right. So the brain is oriented to your survival, but also becoming energy efficient. And so much of the way that the brain operates is, hey, can we organize things so that we don't have to think about them in the prefrontal cortex all the time, and we can hardwire them in? So that's one of the overall drivers of the brain.
Right.
If we now look at what's actually, I made reference to the fact that we've identified 47 different facets. We converted those into what I'll call 5 big buckets. And that the first one, which equates mostly with the reptilian brain, is our need for protection. The next one is, we talked a little bit about the social brain. We are driven towards a need to be with other people. Some people more than others, but we're driven to be one and around other people. We call that participation. And then, as we said about the neocortex, then it's driven towards prediction. Can we get some level of certainty about what's going on? Once those 3 things are being taken care of, then the brain can turn its attention to some other things, which we call purpose and pleasure. Pleasure is getting joy out of doing things, and purpose is, what's the meaning of our lives? Can we get mastery in something? And the brain is constantly scanning for activity that either contributes to a threat, which we're going to try and avoid, or contributes towards a reward, and we like to have those. Doing a big brain summary and brain dump in that 10 minutes.
Very good.
All right. So if we now can go in, what we'll do is we'll take each of those 5 things and dig into them in a little bigger fashion. So let's move on to the next image, which we'll call protection. It's the first one. And it is a fundamental core desire to feel safe, secure, and resilient. I think we're going to have that up on the screen for people to see. So I'm going to keep quiet for about 5 seconds and let people just glance through what that's about. Okay? No two brain, every brain is similar from a hardware perspective. Probably when we're born, we have a sort of an operating system which is similar from one to another. But then everything that happens in our lives changes that operating system slightly. And so we all tend towards a greater or lesser need for each of those 47 facets we were talking about. For example, let's go with resilience. You can see in some children a high ability to just bounce back from anything that happens, right? But equally, you can see in some children, it's very difficult for them to bounce back after some sort of untoward event. And so those type of things tend to be driven genetically, and then they can get enforced by our life experiences.
It's interesting, Phil, and this is just a note for us in the future, is there is something called attachment theory that they did a lot of work. I think I talked to you about it a little bit with young children. And what you were just describing, maybe what we can do at some point is take what has been done on attachment theory and layer in the 5P model and see where there's some correlation between the two, because very fascinating.
And if we can do that, one or other of us deserves a PhD.
We're going to have AI help us, Phil.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I can see right there where there's already some challenge. I can see where you're talking about they're able to be more resilient or less resilient is related to a couple of the different attachment styles already. But obviously AI can take the research and probably make a little bit better correlation for us.
Actually, that's a great idea, because if you look at the other things, our need for physical safety, we are risk averse. Mm-hmm. And in the old days of 1980s and 1990s, we used to go take leaders and their teams out on ropes courses. And now they were perfectly safe. So our prefrontal cortex said, yeah, there's nothing going to happen. But our bodies went, oh no, I'm not walking over that chasm, which is 100 feet deep. What we found is, when I think I can talk about this, as people did walk over, they're doing that walk, and there are a couple of ropes, and they get to the other side, and they are exhilarated, right? But their brain closes down slightly some of the functions because they're under stress, one of which was self-control. And what they found is that, and they did lots of tests about this, is when people got to the other side of that walk, they were more inclined to be sexually aggressive to whoever was on the other side of the chasm.
So if you're married, make sure your spouse is waiting for you. Moral of the story, because otherwise it's a really great way to cause problems, probably.
Exactly. But in the brain, what's going on is it just got aroused in some way and couldn't distinguish between how to satisfy that arousal, basically.
Oh, maybe they need to jump off the chasm real quick and cool off in the pool below.
Yeah. But again, what I'm trying to illustrate here is that consciously we go, no, that's not a good thing to do. But non-consciously, our brain starts to take over.
Right.
So all of those things, and some people actually actively want to experience that danger. People who go bungee jumping.
Or skydiving.
I've been skydiving, but only once.
I can't do it. I even watch the videos of people do it, and I like freak out. I can't do it. Too scary.
Yeah, well, you know what they say. At first, if you don't succeed, try again is the aphorism for a skydiver.
No, you better if I'm strapped on with someone doing a tangent, you better be able to keep me safe. Otherwise, nope, because you only get one chance.
That's exactly right.
Chances if you die on the first one.
Bingo. All right, so let's move on a little bit, and we're going to now look at the next image, which is participation. And that's our need for social connection. And so, again, just putting it in perspective, for all these things, all these 47 different things, we all react differently. Mm-hmm. And some of us have a high need to be working in a group or working with another individual. Other people have no problem working on their own. And again, if you're a person who wants to work on their own and you're forced into a situation where you have to engage with other people, that can put you in a stress state. Mm-hmm. On the other hand, if you love working with other people in a small group and all of a sudden you're now out on your own, as happened in COVID, people who were wanting to be associated with a lot of other people were now put into their homes, or individual didn't have in contact with others. That put them into a stress state, a threat state. So we can actually start seeing, and if you can now start to understand yourself in what you need in all these dimensions, you can actually start understanding how you might either, basically for most of us, we want to lessen our stress. You can understand what's causing you stress, and therefore how can you lessen it.
I think another part is if for example, at work or even at home, you may be someone who enjoys doing things alone, but especially like at home, you're not always going to be able to make decisions independently, especially if you're married to someone. Decisions have to be made jointly, right? And so I think part of the benefit of this is understanding, okay, that is a threat for me, or it puts me into a threat state. So I'm aware of it, which is always, like we have said, the first step. But then two, knowing that's a challenge for me, what is a way of going about it that will make it a little less challenging, but I'm still satisfying the need of making the decision together. Great example is my own marriage. I like to make a lot of decisions together. And My husband, I think he does too for the most part, but he's also probably someone who enjoys making some decisions independently. And so it's been how do we come together and make sure that both of our needs are met and we're not putting ourselves or each other into a state of threat inadvertently or unintentionally. The same thing happens at work too. We talk about you can't make a decision in a vacuum, right? You can do some work independently, but then there are things that you need to make as a collective whole. And so how do you manage it, even if you're in a situation where you may not be able to play to your natural desires? How do you manage it so you're not as stressed out?
Yeah. So let's take that example for a moment. And that is that your need to make decisions independently comes from actually a couple of areas. One is, are you happy being on your own? All right. And then when we look ahead at prediction, do you need to be in control of your own life?
Yeah.
If you score strongly in both of those, it's actually going to be fairly difficult for you to engage with others in making that decision. What we can do is measure all these different facets, and where you have the greatest difference in any given facet is where you're likely to have conflict. So we can actually start getting to the point where we can predict conflict between people and conflict in teams.
Right.
Which in terms of decoding your life, if you've got a significant other and you can both do these assessments, then you can actually turn around and say, that's where we're likely to most have difficulty.
Right.
On the flip side, if you've got a different attitude towards any given facet like that, it means you actually can protect each other, because what one of you is going to see, the other one won't, and vice versa.
Right.
So you've actually got a greater chance for, as a pair or as a team at work, of survival and not having any blind spots.
And I think it's a great time to just say, if anyone is interested, based off what we've already talked about with the PTP and taking the assessment as a couple or as an individual, or it's something you want to explore with work, email us at questions@mybrainwisecoach.com. And we'd be happy to explore what that might look like. And if it's something you're interested in, and how we can help you understand where you are, maybe you and someone else are in your kind of overall PTP, or what might cause more stress in your world.
Yeah. And that's what we're about, is trying to take some of this neuroscience and translate it into something which actually you can apply on a day-to-day basis, or even a minute-by-minute basis. So just in summary, the second dimension or domain is participation, and it's all about belonging. What level of status do you need in the group? For some people, they've got to represent power and influence. Others, I'm happy to be a follower. And while we want to be part of a group, there's a whole bunch of people, me included, needs to differentiate themselves from the group. And we do that in certain ways. And you find that comes out is somebody will turn around and say, let me play devil's advocate. At the right time, that's a useful contribution. But at the wrong time, it drives the team crazy.
Yeah.
And we also have some fear-based things in there. We don't want to look stupid. We don't want to feel like we're an imposter. We don't look like we're incompetent. And most people know what the imposter syndrome is. The impact of scoring high on that is that you will tend to not contribute to a team discussion, even though you actually may have the key to the answer, what the group's wrestling with at the moment, but you don't want to say it because you don't want to look stupid.
Right.
So these are the ways that we can use the neuroscience of the brain to actually do something different in day-to-day life.
Which I think is fantastic. And I know I've seen it be helpful. I know you've seen it be helpful in folks that you've worked with. And I just want to really share a quick plug. Early on in season 1 of our podcast, Phil, we didn't talk about the 5P model in the way we are presenting it today in terms of the assessment that one can take. But we did an individual episode on each of the 5 driving forces. We did protection, participation, prediction, pleasure, and purpose. And so this is a high level summary of each of them and then how it plays into the overall model and assessment profiling. But if you're interested as you're listening and you go, oh, that one, protection it resonates with you for some reason, just go back into season 1 and look at that particular episode and listen to it, because we go into much greater detail and also some application or real life stories.
Yeah. So let's move on to the next one, which is prediction. And that's all about, our brains are almost obsessed with trying to predict the future. There's part of our brain which we call the default network, which actually ruminates about what might happen where it might be positive, it might be negative, or it ruminates about what has already happened. And many people find themselves in the state where they worry about what happened in the past. We have a phrase, you've heard us say this before, give up hope for a better yesterday. It's not going to happen. What can we learn from the past? That's great. But ruminating and worrying about it is not going to get you anywhere.
Right.
But that's all about prediction in the brain. And what we want is we want some clarity, what's expected of us. And that can happen both at home and work.
Mm-hmm.
We want some level of control over our own destiny. I've been an independent consultant for longer than I care to admit. And that's one of my high drivers is, can I be in control of my own destiny? I'd make a terrible employee. You wouldn't want to have me around.
You make a great boss, though.
I probably, yes and no, because the problem with, and this is a good example of the sort of the positives and negatives of anything like that. I'm driven by autonomy. Mm-hmm. And when someone works for me, I assume that they're driven by autonomy as well. So I'll give them a task and get out of their way. For some people, that works perfectly. For others, they actually need more specificity than I typically will give. So one of my learnings has been in the past, identify, is this a person that wants to work on and just go away and take it and run with it? Or should I give a lot more specificity?
And sometimes it may not be just their desire for autonomy, but also their ability or their proficiency in being able to do something. And that might think of them. They might have high autonomy need, but they're not quite at a place where they're able to do it to the level that's needed.
Yeah. And one of the things I do when I'm giving presentations to large groups, I'll ask the question, how many of you like to be told what to do?
99.9% of the time, no. But there is 1.1% of the time, perhaps, but I am certainly not going to talk about it on the podcast. We'll just skip right over that.
But so when I'm doing the program, the same thing will tend to happen with the audience. I'll have 200 or 300 people in the audience and everyone goes, no. And then one person will go, well, yeah, maybe occasionally. Where some richness in the
circumstances, perhaps.
What are those circumstances? And 99 times out of 100, people turn around and say, well, if I don't know what to do.
Yeah, that's not mine. But I'm not going to say what my 0.1% is because it might get our
kicked
off the
air.
We'll
talk about that offline. Yeah. But that one person or two people often will say, yeah, it's when I don't know what to do. And I say, okay, so that's an occasion when you would like to be told what to do and how to do it. Yes, I would. What happens then? Get out of my way.
Right.
And so most people want that level of autonomy at some level. Again, understanding yourself is what this is all about. We also like consistency in ourselves and in others and the way that we're treated. And we want to see everybody treated equally. And especially, we want to be treated consistently amongst other people. If you go back to what was in the protection, we talked about fairness. So if it's not consistent, and I feel like I've been treated unfairly or that person has been treated unfairly, that again triggers us. So all of these things, they're not independent. They all interact in some way.
Right.
And we want people to be authentic with us. And how easy is it to pick up when someone's not being authentic?
Pretty easily. I think they think that it's not that difficult. We might be even ourselves like, oh yeah, no one can tell if I'm not, but pretty easy for most people if they're at least listening and observing some body language to see if you're being authentic or not.
Yeah. So I think it was MIT Media Lab did a whole bunch of research on how good are we at picking up authentic behavior of some sort. And it turns out we're about 96% accurate. Consciously, we may not know it.
Right.
But non-consciously, we walk away and go, there's something wrong with that interaction. There's something wrong about the way that person came across. You may not be able to actually identify it, but that's where people talk about instinct. It's our instinct tends to be, in that context, our non-conscious behavior giving us a message.
Absolutely. It doesn't have to do with authenticity, but just something that came to me is when people are, let's keep moving on. I'll come back to that later. Yeah.
Okay. So the next one that we're going to talk about is purpose and meaning in life. And we've got some natural things, one of which came out of Maslow many years ago, our need to self-actualize and actually be the best person we can be. We want to get some level of mastery. We want to align our lives and live our lives in accordance with what our values are. We want to express ourselves some way. either through mastery or ability, or for some people it's carpentry, or it might be art, or it might be music or anything, but it might be spirituality. We want to express ourselves in some way. And one of the things often is, what's life all about? Seeking of the truth, spirituality, all of those things come together. We call this a higher order function. And if you're not able to deal with all the threats, then it's very difficult. If you're not feeling safe and your safety needs or your protection needs are not being met, it's very difficult to think about the higher things in life. That's your purpose and meaning. And then the next one is, where do we get our pleasure from? Where do we get joy? And there's obviously some physical pleasures that people want, but there's others as well. We want to experience the desire and joy of being alive. We want some excitement. We want to be loved. We want to have some instant gratification. There's a lot of research being done on how people lean towards instant gratification versus deferred reward. And even though we can almost double the reward if it's a year away, people tend to gravitate towards instant gratification. So that's all 5 of them. And we can actually talk about, there's a slide that's about to come up, which is that we have to deal with the threats, which are at the lower level, that's protection, participation, and prediction, before we can deal with the rewards. And that's just the way the brain works. I'll stop there for a moment and take a breath. You know me well enough now, Cole, that I get excited about this stuff. There's lots to talk about. We're not an individual that stays static. You aren't the same person that sat down 40 minutes ago at the beginning of this discussion. You've learned some things. You've got excited. You maybe have got bored, whatever it might be. But your brain has changed very slightly, and it will have incorporated some things. It will remember some. It will throw a lot away. But I just want to summarize on a couple of the things. That number one is that all these domains that we talk about interact with each other. And the one up actually at the slide at the moment, it talks about health and your need for feeling good and healthy, both physically and mentally, is both a protection part and a prediction part. I want to know that I'm going to be healthy moving forward, and that's about prediction. And I know I want to feel safe and good today, and that's about protection. So they interact. The second thing is, although these are the ways that the brain works, we talked about there's some of it as a genetic component, but as you've grown up through life, there's some things that will have happened which actually will then linger on and create a long-term shadow. So, for example, a program I used to run many years ago was on creativity and looking at what are the blocks to creativity. And I used to say to people, write the next thing I say down, and there would be no note paper or pencil in front of everybody.
Right.
And somebody would say, what should I write it on? I'd say the tablecloth. And everyone would laugh and go, no, really, what should I write it on? I go, the tablecloth. And some people physically were unable to actually bring themselves to write on the tablecloth, because what happened when they were 3 and 4 and 5 years old, mum or dad said, no, you can't write on the tablecloth. And that stayed with them for life. And so this isn't just about the brain and its genetics. It's about all of our life experiences. And what we do is differentiate between what we call traits, which are those things that have been around for you for a while, versus states, which are the things that are going on for you right now. And then what we call immediacy is those things that have just happened, and that'll have a major impact on how you feel stressed or not stressed. So that is, we're exploring, I've just put up on the screen, how we might represent that as a diagram on the screen. There's lots of ways we represent it. When we do the PTP, we reorganize all those 47 facets to identify what are the most important drivers for you versus what are those that are least important. And finally, what can you do about all this? And as you said earlier on, first of all, you can take a personal threat profile But even if you don't do that, you can do your own assessment of stepping back and going, what is it that actually does trigger me? And the more you can identify those triggers, the more you're able to be self-aware and do something about them.
Right.
If you can get these questions, the domains, another thing to do is ask your partner or a peer, how do I come across? What do you observe that will tend to trigger me into either withdrawing or getting angry or whatever it might be? One of the things that we can start to do when you're working with other people and you see somebody else, either as a result of what you've done or what somebody else has done, is what might have just triggered them. Which of those 5P processes might have gotten threatened by what somebody just said?
Yeah.
You know,
And I think go ahead.
stepping back and doing a self-assessment, you and I have talked about this so many times, is understanding yourself is actually the first step in all of this.
I think getting the book, especially for those who are really interested, off Amazon, Understand Your Brain for a Change, because it'll have the 47 plus more facets. 47 is what's in the current PTP, but then there's others that are identified for pleasure and for purpose. But give you a greater understanding of what is within each one of the 5Ps and help you begin to make a self-assessment. But then we highly encourage and we would love to interact and engage with our BrainWise community and reaching out to us on questions at mybrainwisecoach.com, because we'd love to interact with you. We'd love to be able to have you go through the assessment if it's of value or of interest to you. And we can talk about what all of that looks like. But it's a great tool. I don't want to say it's like other assessments because I think it's very unique and very powerful, but it's similar in ways that it's helping to understand what's happening for you. And this is one of the only ones I've come across that helps you understand from a neuroscience perspective where you're maybe feeling threat and how to help yourself be able to manage through that. One of the things, Phil, I think would be interesting is you've got several stories that have emerged out of this kind of overall process and people taking the PTP. Can you think of one or two that are really powerful, kind of anecdotal stories, but they're real, but share them with our BrainWise friends and how someone took the PTP and then what was the realization and what did they then do with it? Why it was so powerful?
So yeah, I won't include any names, but there was one gentleman I was working with many years ago, and the top two things that were important to him, number one was go with the flow. And that is our ability to, no matter what's going on, to track what's going on and just not get bothered by changes in direction or any of those type of things. So that was his number one. His number two was obey the rules. And I was confused when I first saw this. It's because it's almost like they are in opposition to one another. And so I said to him, so how does that play out in your daily life? Oh, that's easy. He said, all the while we haven't made a decision, I'm happy to go with the flow. Once we make a decision, then stick to it. And he then stopped. He got quite emotional and he realized, he said, those are two parts of my character. I'm very go with the flow, almost spiritual, to a spiritual level of going through the flow and watching what's going on. But once we decide that's what we're going to do, then that's our plan and we're not going to change it.
Right.
Just recognizing that in himself helped him understand. So first of all, it helped in his private life because he could identify which of those two characters was now actually driving and was it still appropriate. Mm-hmm. And it helped in his team life when he was working with he was a chief operating officer and he was in constant conflict with some of the other members on the team because they hadn't recognized which of those two characters were coming out. They saw the go with the flow character and they thought that's who we have. Mm-hmm. And then when he got very predictive and saying, no, we agreed upon this, what happened to you? Did you get out the wrong side of bed? And so that's a real life example of about that was 4 years ago.
No, I think it's great. It demonstrates that we are not all one way in terms of how we operate, but in certain circumstances, different things will present themselves. It's going back to multiple characters conversation we had a while back, how there's different parts of us that show up in different situations. So I think it's powerful, especially if you feel comfortable sharing it with others, because then you can hopefully help recognize it and self-manage. But if others know, then they're also able to go, oh, okay, this is where it's coming from. And of course, models really help create perspective, right? It takes what is ambiguous and makes it a bit more understandable.
Yeah, absolutely. And some people live in ambiguity. Other people, if something's ambiguous, it is almost debilitating for them.
And what's interesting is and it could be based off the topic, because I'm pretty good with ambiguity. Sorry, I need to figure out how to pronounce words today. It's terrible. I'm pretty good with it in certain contexts at work. Like, we don't know exactly what our defined goal is yet. We're working on, or we're coming up with the project. Okay, great. But then there are things like my future or my work life. What am I going to do next in my career? Or where are we going to get the finances for X? That type of ambiguity is a bit more difficult for me to manage. I don't go as easy with it as I would if we're defining the future state of a project, or we don't have all the answers, but they're going to come together as we go along the journey at work. That I'm fine with, but others I'm not. So it seems somewhat circumstantial too.
It absolutely is. And not only is it circumstantial for the topic, but it can be circumstantial for when it occurs during the week or even during the day.
Right.
Because if something comes up and you're not quite sure, there's a level of ambiguity, and it's 9 o'clock on a Monday morning, your brain is better able to and better equipped to deal with that than if it comes up at 5 o'clock on a Friday afternoon.
Oh, for sure. I had a boss that I worked with, love her dearly. She's a great friend of mine. If you wanted to have rich dialogue where you're going back and forth and coming up with plans, and it was going to be something that you may have a little bit of a debate about, you wanted to get it in before 2 p.m. on any given day. Because after 2 p.m., you could have wonderful conversations, do a little check-in, but it was going to be more difficult to make strategic decisions. It was going to be more difficult to outline plans and to have those debates because it just wasn't the right timing. So I learned that very quickly, and all meetings moved up in the day.
And where our brains are actually much better between about 7 or 8 o'clock in the morning and midday. Mm-hmm. We got more brain energy, we got more brain self-control and all those type of things. Our prefrontal cortex is not depleted. And so, yeah, practical application. If you've got tough stuff to do it earlier in the day and earlier in the week.
Right.
There's some great research that's been done on parole discussions. If someone's in prison, for any of our listeners, if you happen to go to prison for a felony or whatever it might be,
which we hope doesn't happen.
We hope doesn't happen. But when you go to your parole meeting, do it in the morning, not the afternoon. It turns out there's a much greater chance of getting parole agreed to in the morning than there is in the afternoon.
Interesting.
Yeah. And so it manifests itself all over the place. Probably even better if you're going to get on a plane flight, take a morning flight rather than an evening flight.
Which is interesting because I knew a guy who flew. I don't think he ever spent any time at home, or very little anyways. And he said he got his best sleep on a plane. I don't know how, but apparently he did. So he would leave at midnight or 2 because he would be sleeping on the plane the whole way, which is just fascinating to me because I can't do that. My head's bobbing like this. I got a neck ache. But apparently it worked for him.
Yeah. So understanding, and again, if anybody wants to buy the book, or if anybody just says, what are those 47 things, we can send that to them. And then you can do your own assessment of saying, where am I on all these? And where's the rest of my team? You can start getting to the point where if you start to understand these, you can recognize when somebody responds in a way that you didn't anticipate. Right. I wonder what I just stepped on for them. Mm-hmm. And if you can learn that, then you can learn, hey, maybe I won't do that again.
And I think a big part of this is because I can hear in my mind some people going, why do I need to do this? It's not, we're about business and all these other things. I can hear it in my mind's eye, people giving different things, especially from experiences. But the challenge that I always have thrown back is if you're all about business, you're all about getting results. If you can figure out how to show up as a better leader and get better results, would that be something you're interested in doing? Because
absolutely,
at the end of the day, if you're all about business and all about results, then you should be willing to navigate the space in different ways, right? But if you're all about business and you refuse to do that and you're going to stick to this particular path, then you might want to change your narrative, is what I would share with them, because you're not really all about business. You're all about yourself. And there would be some hard conversations in that space sometimes. And it can be challenging, but it's also very rewarding, especially if you are driven by getting better results and helping the business perform or whatever it is. If you make a couple tweaks in how you show up, you might actually get even more significant payout from it.
And I was very fortunate in an early stage of my leadership career in that I was taught a few of these tools, which are now buried inside this. And I had a little bit of, I went away on a week's course about what I learned doesn't matter, but I came back and I went, I wonder if it really applies in the real world. And so I had a particularly thorny issue that I had to address. And so I used the tool and I resolved a 3-month issue in about 2 hours.
Wow.
Using one of these tools. So again, to your point, is if we're willing to change the tools we use, the narratives, the mental mindsets we have about certain things, we can get some incredible work done incredibly quickly and come out feeling even happier about it.
Absolutely. I think this has been a fabulous conversation for our BrainWise friends. And it's encapsulating a lot of what we've talked about in prior episodes, but in a way that you can actually measure it for yourself and understand where you're coming from, and even maybe decipher to some degree where another might be coming from, or have them participate. And I would encourage everyone to get the book if it's of interest. And if you even would like to discuss it one-on-one and the potential of taking the assessment, reach out to us at questions at My BrainWise Coach, because we'd love to have that interaction and help you go along your chosen path in your life's journey. And as always, comment, share, subscribe, rate, review our podcast on all socials and wherever you get your podcast, because it helps others find us so that they too can begin to live their life in a brainwise way. And until next time, stay curious, stay compassionate, and always stay brainwise.
Stay brainwise.